Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Okay, if we could make yourselves comfortable and grab a seat, grab a beanbag, because we've got a really cool interview for you tonight. Just a quick show of hands, who's been to a startup grind before, just so I know? So we've got a couple, okay. Also heard we've got some people from Lithuania. Anyone else from Europe? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, we've got 3, 4, 5 from Europe. Where else have we got people from? Bali, local, yeah? Any other locals? Yeah? And g'day, you're local as well? Yep. Or Jakarta, Bali, yep. Where else have we got? Any Australians? Hey, Australians and Bali, that's pretty common. What other nationalities? What have we missed? Russians? Any other Russians? We got a couple? Yeah? 3 Russians? South Africa? Yeah? Wow. So this space is a very global space, as you can tell. So tonight, Startup Grind, we have Terry, who's going to come and interview Bryan. And if you don't know Terry, Terry is the global lead facilitator for iLab Entrepreneurs Institute. She's also someone that has mentored me. My name as well is Rory Callahan, so I'm actually here facilitating a 2-week retreat in Bali with some of these beautiful humans that are sitting here and one there and a couple up the back as well. So they're all working on their business and trying to find a way to scale that and take that to the next level, or they're working on an idea or looking for partnerships and ways to really get out there and promote what they're doing. So without further ado, I'll let Terry go into the details of Bryan, and she's going to interview him in a very organic, nonchalant way. And without further ado, could we give Terry and Bryan a big round of applause?
Thanks, Rory.
You don't need that.
No, yeah, Bryan will need that. Okay, well, I'll let you take your seat, and I'm just going to give you a brief introduction. Welcome everyone, this is really exciting to have you here. I'm usually standing up the front with a group like Rory is doing currently. We're helping entrepreneurs take their business to another level, so it's really nice to be at Startup Grind and having the absolute pleasure to interview Bryan, who is Bryan Stewart, who has an amazing story, and his businesses of what he's got and why he's in business and how they came about is phenomenal. So we're going to get right into it. So I'll get you to give him a round of applause. And okay, so I'd love to start with the end in mind, but let's start from the beginning. So obviously, first of all, how long have you been in Bali?
Sure. So thank you, Terry, and thank you for Startup Grind and Vision Villas to invite me to speak. I'm quite excited to be here. I've been in Bali for about 2 years, but I've been coming to Indonesia for about 10 for my advisory business.
Yep. Okay, so where are you from previous to living in Bali?
I was previously based in Shanghai.
Yeah.
I can go into a little detail perhaps about how I ended up in Asia.
I'd love to, but I'd love to actually know where you're originally from.
Now we're all citizens of the globe, aren't
yes,
we? It's so hard to say.
Where were you born?
I was born in Vermont, which is great for ice cream and maple syrup. But I only lived there for 1 year.
Yeah.
And then I lived around the Midwest and the West of the US until after college. And then I ended up living and working internationally since then.
Okay, so where was the first place that you went after you left the US?
I was always fascinated with developing countries, so I ended up joining the US Peace Corps, and they sent me off to the Balkans, where I lived in Bulgaria for 2.5 years. I worked in environmental management and community economic development. So I worked with a little municipal government. This was back in 2000, and it was before Bulgaria had joined the European Union. And there were a lot of, it still had a bit of a hangover from the crisis years of the late 80s. And so we spent a lot of time writing grants, winning money from USAID, from the European Union, from various donors, the World Bank, for various infrastructure improvement in the community. And to tie it into business, we won a lot of money. There was a huge unemployment rate in the town that I was working in. And so we were pretty much going out begging for money, and I was writing a lot of grant proposals. But towards the end of my time there, a ski accessories factory moved in from Switzerland and set up a factory, and the employment rate improved drastically night and day. And then the government started to get tax revenue, and then from that tax revenue they could provide a lot of the services that we were begging for. And I thought, wow, the power of business can be really effective in supporting the public sector and providing public goods. So that's really what intrigued me about getting into business. But originally, I was very much focused on development and public goods, and I was quite anti-business, actually.
Yeah.
Although I remained in development consulting, working with development finance institutions for about 5 years before switching into business and finance.
So how long ago was that? How long ago were you in that field?
So I did graduate school in Boston, and then from graduate school, I was studying international finance, and I connected with a couple groups that do private equity and venture capital in emerging markets. I assume most of you have some familiarity with what private equity and venture capital is. It is private investments into young companies. Private equity, venture capital is a type of private equity. Private equity in general is more broad, but growth capital, buyout capital goes into more mature companies. And so I got connected into that universe, which I've been working in for the past a little more than a decade.
Okay, so when did you, well, I'd love to hear your story about how you actually, loved and got into the Southeast Asia market. But with Liberty Global, which is a business that you're a director of, because how many directors are there of that?
We're a small team of 4 people.
4 people.
Yeah.
Okay, so when did that get founded, and how did you get to be part of that?
Liberty Global is an advisory firm focused on emerging markets, private equity and venture capital. And to describe the core business, what you have is, let's say you have a startup here and you're looking for capital, so you'll approach a venture capitalist that's probably sitting in Jakarta or Singapore, and you will pitch them, and then they will provide you capital. Now a VC or a PE investor needs their money from somewhere as well. Oftentimes it's not their own money, it's someone else's money. So they form a fund, and then they raise that money from other larger, oftentimes larger and distant investors that have a portfolio of assets. So a lot of investors that indirectly will go into, say, startups. So everybody, who here knows Gojek? All right. So Gojek is Uber for motorbikes, and they have received a lot of capital from investors in Southeast Asia. In fact, those dollars, the vast majority of that actually comes from the US, and that comes from institutions like pension funds, insurance companies, school endowments, wealthy families that they call family offices, and other institutions. And those institutions are looking to deploy their money in various ways. And so they will identify this venture capitalist in Singapore or in Jakarta and say, this guy's really smart, they have invested in some really interesting companies, so they write him a check for $100 million bucks. And then that VC is tasked. Basically, they're the boss of that VC, and that VC is tasked to invest in fast-growing companies like Gojek.
Yeah. So what other sort of organisations are you working with?
So my firm, I was hired out of graduate school, actually, for Liberty Global. And we're a small advisory firm, and we have, within this network of funds, startups, VC funds, and then the ultimate investors, the institutions need to find these VCs and to find these investment opportunities. And they want to get into emerging markets. And so they would hire, oftentimes they will look, they will hire staff to go out there, or they will use an advisor like ourselves. And so Liberty Global hired me to go out to Asia and meet with venture capitalists in China, India, and Southeast Asia, and the portfolios of those, and to evaluate those portfolios, and then to make calls on which VCs we thought were the smartest. And so what we do is I would go into a market like Indonesia, and I would analyze the venture capital firms or the private equity firms, and then I would go to the portfolio companies and I would look at those, and then we would do our analysis, and then we would present to these investors in North America and Western Europe that are interested in Indonesia. We would say, these guys are the smart ones. So we, in essence, are a broker crossing that bridge. These investors in the US, they don't know anything about Indonesia, so they couldn't make that investment into Gojek themselves. They need those smart VCs that can both invest the capital, choose the right company, but then also provide all the other value-added services that a VC does, which is the advice, the coaching, helping them with their financial organizations, providing that oftentimes CFO type role.
Yeah. So you've been involved with that organisation, which is obviously now you're a director as part of, for quite a while now. How different has it, or how much has it changed since you started, like with technology, and the way the global market goes since you started to pretty much now?
That's a fascinating question. So I was first in Indonesia in 2008. I was based in Shanghai originally. 2006 I started in Shanghai. And I would come down to Indonesia. In 2008 we started working here, and the opportunities at that time were not tech, were not venture capital. Nobody said VC in Indonesia. That was very strange. But very few people even saw Indonesia as an investable market for any type of business. There was the Asian financial crisis, burned Indonesia, pretty much the worst of almost any country in Asia. And there was a very big hangover from that. And a lot of foreign investors wouldn't touch Indonesia at all. And at about 2008, when the global financial crisis was coming along, what happened, interestingly, was that Indonesia had a lot of its books in order. So a lot of the debt had been cleaned up. A lot of the poor running companies were already wiped out. And so a lot of companies were quite strong. So when the global financial crisis came along, Indonesia performed and maintained a positive growth, GDP growth that year, and did very well. And people looked up and thought, wow, there's actually something interesting here going on in Indonesia. And at that time, there's also a shift in investment focus towards the consumer class. Previously, a lot of people saw Indonesia as opportunities for natural resources. Go in for mining, go in for palm oil, go in for all of these types of fishing. A lot of these types of natural resources play. But Indonesia is the fourth largest population in the world, and now there's a GDP per capita of 4,000 USD, and that is almost double what's in India at that time. And people saw this growing consumer class, and so in 2008, 2009, a lot of the investment opportunities were in these sectors, which were basic consumer, banking, financial services. When somebody can, for the first time, own a car, for the first time, get a bank account, get some insurance as they join the middle class. So a couple of the companies, for example, that our investors were involved in are like Alphamart. Alphamart is similar to Indomart and similar to like a 7-Eleven concept. And it was extremely fast growing in 2008, 2009. They were opening a store around Indonesia every 2 days. And it was pretty remarkable because it is, up until that time, most towns and villages around Indonesia have mom and pop stores where somebody takes their house, and at the very front room of their house, they open up a little shop. And then that little shop is where you can buy everything. And Alphamart comes in and professionalizes everything. They provide a clean, air-conditioned space, building. They provide modern logistics supply routes. So the diversity of products increases greatly. Also, the expiration date on these products is more reliable. And they could do it at a price point below what a lot of these traditional mom and pop stores were doing. So the experience that the consumer had was a lot more genuine.
Yeah.
or more satisfying at a cheaper price point.
Yeah.
And so that was a very big investment opportunity. Similarly, one of our investors went into a bank, and this bank was called BTPN, and BTPN was famous because it had government connections in that a lot of government employees would choose that bank to receive their retirement money. And so what they did is very traditional. They would every month have a day where they open up a big room like this, and everybody comes and picks up their retirement paycheck. And then they would have a potluck, and they'd have music, and everybody gets together, and they get their paycheck, they catch up with their old workmates, and then that kind of atmosphere is a big social event in the calendar for people. And so everybody that retired from the national government would choose BTPN to get their paycheck, their retirement from, because they wanted to be part of that. And so they had this kind of monopoly. And our investor went in, actually bought the bank, and then took that stable cash flow and actually rolled out a microfinance platform within Indonesia, which was very interesting at the time, but still nothing along the lines of tech, nothing along the lines of startups. So that's what was happening back then.
Yeah.
Now the landscape's very different.
Okay, so what's really important, obviously, in business is ensuring that you're attracting the right market. And it's rather than going out, a lot of people that in startup businesses or even existing businesses have the challenge of making sure the market, they are going with the trends that are coming in the future, because being a step ahead is important. So what do you think you've done differently with that business in order to make sure that you've always got the right market coming in? Or has there been times when you've picked up certain clients that potentially you shouldn't have, or that weren't the right market at the time? So what do you do around that?
That's a great question. For us, our firm is an advisory firm.
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of time looking at trends and analyzing patterns. And I would spend most of my time on the road, being in China, Southeast Asia, India.
Yeah.
And that provides a very interesting perspective on the world and seeing the trends. But for us, it was very simple. If we chose a potential venture capital or private equity firm that we thought was very interesting and doing the right things, we would then take them to our investor network in North America on, in essence, like a roadshow, like an investment bank does. And the investors in North America say, nope, this isn't interesting. And then, there's no deal. So it was very quick because the market decides. That said, sometimes I thought the market chose poorly,
Yeah.
and that some of these guys were much smarter than, but they weren't able to communicate the opportunity to these international investors that they were involved in. Conversely, for my firm, it's a relationship business, and so if we introduced a potential opportunity to one of our network of investors who goes into that opportunity, these investments are long term, so it's a 5 to a 10-year investment because it's private and it's not liquid, it's not public. And if they get burned, then it damages the relationship. So we have to be very careful on the opportunity.
Okay, so, and that's really interesting because in particular the iLab group that are here at the moment are going through the market and making sure, and what's key obviously is what I was saying, is following trends, knowing that it's not just for now, you've got to look what's coming as well. So obviously you are in Southeast Asia for a reason, you like it, you see that there's huge potential here. So how much time do you actually still put into Liberty Global while being here? Because we'll go into Outpost in a moment, so we'll move into that. But how much time are you still putting into that organisation compared to where you were at?
Nowadays, I actually spend very little time with Liberty Global. I was just in Singapore. I flew in today. Yesterday, there was a ASEAN Venture Capital Summit where the Singapore and ASEAN Venture Capital Associations get together. So there's VCs from everywhere from Vietnam, Myanmar, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand that come together every quarter and it's a closed-door meeting among these venture capital firms, and they discuss deals and trends. I came in to tell them about fundraising, and so I do get invited to events like that where I can provide some of my knowledge about fundraising. But nowadays I'm focused almost entirely on Outpost.
Okay.
And it was originally my business partner and I set it up as a side project because I can go into details about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's quickly gone from a side project to my main business.
So it's taken the focus off. But just before we move on to that, so how much, I mean, there's a lot of crowdfunding that happens now for organisations to raise money, and even like multi-millions of dollars, you can crowdfund for. How has that impacted the VC world, do you think?
Not very much yet.
Yeah.
But I think it will be very destabilizing for the VCs.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be very good, actually, for startups in a lot of ways. I think VCs provide a lot of value outside of money, good VCs. So I think for someone who wants to raise money and they're evaluating different ways to raise money, there is some value in a venture capital or a professional investor because they can provide a lot of coaching and advice, and they can connect you with other people that can be advisors to your business. It's almost like they are a extension of your staff in a certain way. I see a lot of startups look at a VC and they say, oh my gosh, this VC's got all this money and all these connections and I'm just this guy down here, and they look up to him. And I think actually they need you just as much as you need them because they're looking for someone to invest in. So if anything, the relationship it's a relationship of equals, if not your superior, in effect, because they will fight tooth and nail to find the best startup to get into. And if you really believe in your business and you've done your work, you're that startup. And I think when you meet a VC, it's a dating. It's like a dating process. So if they say no, it's just like you saying no to them. There's different quality of money.
Yeah.
So there's bad money, there's good money, there's neutral money, and there's bad money. And what I mean by that is good money is someone that provides all those value-added services that I was saying, that's an extension of your team, provides a lot of that CFO type financial advisory, helps you get to the next level of your business. Neutral money is money that is generally just money. It has no real strings attached, doesn't affect your business in any way. Bad money is money where the person's coming in and meddling and sending you in bad directions. And you've got to really evaluate that. And that's part of the dating process when you first meet a VC. You're evaluating them and what they can offer you just as much as they're evaluating you.
Yeah.
And first-time entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who are not familiar with VCs often forget that point.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's go into what I know everyone's wanting to hear about, which is Outpost and how that started, because that was quite interesting how it started. You and David are in partnership with that or co-founded that together. Are you still working together with David?
Yes.
With that?
I'll go into Outpost, but I could talk a little bit more about Southeast Asian venture as well.
You can. Actually, if you want to do that first, then we'll go into
Sure.
Outpost after that. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So I think that Southeast Asia is at a really unique point in its development. I know Bali is like an island unto its own, and there's not a lot of people that are entrepreneurs and working on startups here are going after global opportunities. They're not going after Southeast Asia specific opportunities generally. But there's a lot of interest in startups and in entrepreneurship in Southeast Asia now, and it's not really in Bali. Bali's, we have the startup grind here, we have co-working spaces like Outpost and whatnot, but if you really wanted to get into the startup ecosystem, you really go to Singapore or Jakarta. So there's very interesting stuff going on in that area. But I can go to Outpost first. So how did Outpost start? I was traveling around quite a bit, and I found that I would be between meetings. Say, if I had a meeting in Singapore and then 4 days later I was in Jakarta, I'd come to a place like Bali, and I'd work from Bali. And I found that I would go to my hotel, and the internet wasn't so good at my hotel. The infrastructure wasn't very good, or I would need something printed or some other service, and there wasn't the service available. And then after a couple days, I'd get really bored because I said, there's nobody to talk to, there's no community, socially, and also in terms of inspiring ideas if I'm struggling with a business concept. So I thought there's more and more people like myself that are successful professionals, and they have that ability to work remotely, at least part-time, and so they're looking for that community. And so David felt similar. He's been spending a lot of time in Bali over the past decade as well, and so we set up Outpost. And that's really what we wanted to serve, were people like ourselves who wanted a professional community, but also were attracted to Bali and the work-life balance, all of the beautiful things that Bali has to offer, the nature, the rich culture. Yeah.
So how did you know about co-working before that, of co-working spaces? Had you looked into that or researched in any way, or was it just something that you created based on you knew that you had a need for it and you could offer it to others?
I had not.
You hadn't? Cool.
No, I had been working from cafes for a decade, as I was on the road almost nonstop, and the co-working phenomenon is quite new, actually. WeWork was only set up 6 or 7 years ago, and they are currently at a $20 billion valuation. They're the 4th tech unicorn behind Airbnb and Uber in the current lists that they have of unicorns. And within Indonesia, when we were setting up Outpost, there was a couple other co-working spaces here on the island as well, but there were none really in Jakarta. Jakarta had one, which is subsequently closed, but now there's probably 50 in Jakarta alone.
Wow,
Since, just in the past couple years.
Yeah.
And they are receiving lots of capital. Singapore has double that, and it's really a new way of working. There are corporates that have co-working spaces within the corporation.
Yep.
There's just independent co-working spaces, there's incubators, there's accelerators, they're all across the board for many different types of people.
Yeah, so is Outpost co-working, co-living?
We do have co-living as well.
Yeah. How does that work? Because I know that there's others that have come to Bali looking to start, and they've attempted to start co-living, co-working, so more the other way around, rather than the focus on the co-working, and it's not worked. I think the model's been wrong. So how much focus do you put on the co-living side of it?
We were originally looking at co-working, and then many of our members were asking for co-living.
Yeah.
So we took on some villas nearby, and it's only 6 bedrooms.
Okay.
So it's quite a small part of the business.
Yeah.
We're also on a resort, which sometimes offers rooms to our members, which helps out. But only a very small percentage of our members are actually in the villas as well.
So what's your membership number overall for that? Do you have any idea?
How do you define members?
Well, do you have a membership program where people actually sign up for a membership where they can, if they are in Bali, they come back to Bali, they can use it again because they're paying a membership?
Yes, it's a lot of co-working spaces are like gym memberships.
Yeah.
And we'll have between 100 and 200 people come through in a month.
Yeah. Okay, so is that a stable number, or is that do you put a lot of focus into getting that to grow, or do you have a team of people who work on that to make sure that it's pretty consistent or growing?
We do. I think the opportunity in co-working is a great question mark. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people putting money into co-working spaces, and WeWork got started as it was a real estate play. It was coming out of the global financial crisis. Real estate in New York was very cheap, so they were able to get long-term leases on very cheap real estate, and then they turned around and rented it out for short terms and small bits to its members at a higher price.
Yeah.
And that's really how they got going. now they're very large, and they're able to provide a lot of value-added services on top of the space because of the amount of money they have.
Yeah.
What's happening in the US right now is that they are going into every city, and so co-working spaces in Kansas City, say in Missouri, that hasn't had a WeWork before, will have 2 or 3 local chains, and those chains, when WeWork comes in, will really suffer because they can't provide the same quality of service at the same price point, and they get squeezed out.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the smaller chains are suffering and are not profitable, while WeWork is, because they're able to dominate. In places like Jakarta and Singapore, the real estate developers have gotten into the business, and you have anchors, and they see a co-working space as an anchor tenant within new buildings, and so they will subsidize a co-working space. And what you have in a co-working space is it's an arbitrage between the long-term lease and the short-term that you rent it out for to people. And as more and more players get in the space, it drives down the price point. And when developers get involved and they're subsidizing it, then there's no margin, and so nobody is profitable.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening in Jakarta and Singapore. So it's a very tricky model. That's not so much happening yet in Bali,
Yeah.
but it could.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the entrepreneurial, like the laptop lifestyle's just growing massively, and, these co-working spaces are just popping up everywhere. Like you said, the bigger organisations are going in there and squeezing out the little guys. So is there any advice you can give on, if you are someone that wants to, say, start like a co-working space back from where they're from, that would support them?
I think nowadays you just need a defendable niche. If you are setting up a co-working space, you want a space that serves a particular type of customer that a generalist space will not. What you're selling is community.
Yeah.
And WeWork is a very diverse community, but the successful co-working spaces that are not WeWork target a very specific niche, like NGOs or like mothers, and they'll have, or fathers that have a daycare in the space. Yeah. And these are defendable niches that WeWork will not get into. So I think that's similar to any type of business that's online these days, is that you will have the big players that come in, but then you'll have the niche players. So for example, in Indonesia over the past 2 years, the hottest sectors have been e-commerce and marketplaces. And these large Amazon or Alibaba equivalents would come in, were funded, and they would fight for the market. And they subsidized the purchasing of the online shopper. And so it was a lot of money was flooded in, and then what is sorted out is Alibaba came in and purchased Lazada, which was the biggest player, and now they control the market at the general level. But if you want to do, there's still a lot of opportunities in e-commerce, but it's in particular verticals. So maybe you do baby clothing, and you have a very strong baby clothing opportunity in line. You could sell, you could still create a website and have an opportunity in that. Yeah. But it's just being niche, knowing your market, and knowing who your customer is and serving that customer.
So what's yours? What's your niche with it?
What's our niche?
Post chair.
Sure, we're looking at destination co-working.
Okay.
And these are people that are not generally living in that location long-term or from that location. We only have about 10% of our membership are Indonesian. We would like to grow that, but to create it needs to have that base in order to have an authentic experience that people want. But we see destination co-working as the opportunity.
Yeah. So you're starting up in Cambodia as well?
We do have a pop-up there. And that is, the origin of that is that we have a contact there who had this beautiful building, and he wanted us to set up a Outpost there. And so we took it on for a 6-month pop-up, and just offering our members to go there and also see what the market's like. It's just an experiment. I think when you're a young company as well, you can experiment, and you shouldn't be afraid to take chances that may be outside of your business model to play around with different opportunities. As the business grows bigger, it's much harder to pivot and to explore with different opportunities. So the most successful businesses are often ones that have pivoted multiple times. I have a brother who used to work at Amazon as a tech developer, and he left and set up a startup with his coworker. He's CTO and she was CEO, and they went through Techstars. And originally their whole program that they started with Techstars was to do a search engine type approach for their specific business. By the time they finished Techstars, they were doing something totally different. But they presented, and at the end of Techstars, you present in front of, you have your demo day, and they won the demo day and they got their first $1 million. A year later, they pivoted a second time to do something totally different again. And the market rewarded them by giving them a Series A round of financing after that, because they had built up this experience and this team with all these skills. And though they were doing something that's 3 iterations away, they were doing it methodically, they knew their market, and by this time they had, the second iteration is a little bit different, but they're B2C, so they're focusing on consumers, and they switched to B2B, focusing on businesses. Yeah. And once they started signing up the businesses, now the business has really taken off.
So that's an awesome point, because there's obviously licensing and franchises that people can choose to do, and you could do that with Outpost if you wanted, right? How relevant is it, do you think, nowadays? Like, we've got the likes of McDonald's who, it's the same pretty much everywhere you go. How relevant is it to have a model like that, as opposed to a model where you have to adapt more to a market, more to a community? You know, even like with Outposts that you've got here as opposed to in Cambodia. Would you change, if Cambodia takes off, will you change that model to adapt to the market, or will you just relevant to how you've got it here?
That's a great question. We're still playing around and experimenting. I think that I'm not afraid of the McDonald's model if it's authentic.
Yes.
If you're providing an authentic experience that people want, then you can replicate it. The problem is when it's not authentic and you're just creating a mass market product, it loses its soul. And especially for, say, a co-working community, that community wants a soul. So I met the MD of WeWork yesterday for Asia, and they just received $1 billion from SoftBank, and they acquired a co-working space chain in Singapore a couple weeks ago, and they are targeting Jakarta and some other places. And they are somehow, interestingly, he said, when people walk in the door, they want energy, and they want activity, and they want to feel engaged immediately. And so they're trying to create that authentic experience, although they're creating a McDonald's type approach. Yes. And they actually, I asked him where they're going, and he said, we're going to be in every major city in the world, if not tomorrow, but very soon. Yeah. And they have the money to do it. I don't think that's what we want. I think what we're building is a business that needs to be more responsive to the people that we're offering it to, because people are traveling to Bali for a more authentic experience. So I don't think we can do something like that, but I think there is a certain core, if we were to grow to other locations, there's a certain core ethos and brand that you have to maintain to say this is the quality experience. Any business, regardless of whether it's an Outpost or a co-working space, you have to provide a quality service that's reliable. And so you have to continue certain level of standard, regardless of how, say, unique it is to that particular market.
Yeah, okay, great answer, thank you. So we'll park that for now, because we'll open up for questions soon, but I want you to go and talk more about Southeast Asia and why you think it's such an awesome market and what's happening that you can share with everyone.
Sure, for startups, so I've been here actively coming to Indonesia since 2008, and I have found that before 2012, nobody talked about startups, and there was really very little interest. I went to my first, today, there's these massive events, massive conferences, this week Singapore has this Switch, which is Singapore Week of Innovation and Technology. And they're having massive events every day of the week. Yesterday was this event called Slush, which is a massive startup event. It was in this huge hall. There were like strobe lights everywhere. There was 3 stages with speakers nonstop, thousands of participants. And there are, within Southeast Asia, there's 4 or 5 conferences every year of a similar nature. Echelon, Tech in Asia, Slush, Wild Digital, and not just in Singapore, but being replicated in each country almost, all the major countries. And this fervor you have is you have young people in their 20s, and what they want to do is be in a startup. And that's the excitement and the buzz. And it is a bit of a fad, but also I think there's some real opportunities there. And the number of startups, so for example, 2013, there was only about 2,000 startups that were looking for investment capital in Southeast Asia. Now there's over 10,000. And that is a growth of, very, very major growth. The tech investments were about 500 million in 2013. Last year there was about 2.2 billion in tech investments in Southeast Asia. And the opportunity is quite huge. So I have some experience with Gojek. They were a company that we have an investor that went into. And this investor was the first institutional investor in Gojek. Gojek is like a Uber for taxis. They actually were around for quite some time, but they were a call service. And they were based in Jakarta. Jakarta has a lot of traffic, and they have a lot of motorcycles that serve as taxis. And people would traditionally call them up and order a taxi, a motorcycle to their building to pick them up. 2014, in December of 2014, they only had under 100 drivers, and they were doing a couple hundred orders per month. They took the investment of my investor, and they built an app. They launched the app in January. By March, they were getting 30,000 orders per month, and they had about 300 drivers. So that growth was just really phenomenal. I went in, I think it was March 2015, and I met the entire team, and they were completely scattered. There was the call center, which they're still doing calls in one corner, and then everywhere else were just people not knowing what to do. There was drivers lined up outside applying, and it was complete kind of chaos. But they had, 30,000 orders was pretty amazing. I just checked the first quarter of this year, and so that was January 2015 to March 2015. This year, sorry, I've got some statistics here. I like statistics. Gojek was doing, so they had, first quarter of this year, per month, they're doing 26 million orders. And they're in 18 cities with 200,000 drivers. And that, in order to grow like that from a startup to that scale, is just phenomenal. China had that speed of growth with a lot of their unicorn. Well, it had that type of growth with a lot of their unicorns, but it was over the course of, say, 6 years. This was in the course of 2 years. And so there's a lot of territory that's open. Now, Gojek has expanded to provide different services. How many of you have used Gojek here? Okay. And how many of you used it just for riding versus something else? All right, so the traditional one is you ride on the back of it. Now most orders are for restaurant delivery or go massage to get a massage or get your nails done. And they're providing all sorts of different services. And that is that they solved a problem, and then they're able to expand their service offering. Indonesia has a lot of bottlenecks in terms of doing business. And now that they've cracked the nut, they're able to expand also into different verticals. And in Indonesia, you see a lot of conglomerates do that. So there's about 20-something conglomerates, and they own the majority of the economy. And that's because once they get to a certain scale, they're able to solve a lot of these bottlenecks. Gojek was able to do it as a startup. So May 2016, for example, they rolled out a payment platform called GoPay. And today, it's the the most used, the largest mobile wallet, digital wallet in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And they're actually decoupling it now from the Gojek service, so you can use GoPay elsewhere. So there's a big race for financial services now, and they're winning it because they had that infrastructure already. And they're going into some other verticals as well. So there's a lot of green territory, and if you get the game right, you can expand at rates that are just insane.
I think that just so many don't realise what is available for them, and it's particularly when people are looking at startups, they don't necessarily know. Someone might want to start something up because they are passionate about it, as opposed to there's a need. Whereas it sounds like you find what you're saying is like you find a need, and you can create a business around that as a startup, and it's the right business that can go anywhere in this market, in the Southeast Asian market.
That's true. I think one investor once told me she was describing all the problems she had, and then she said to me, every problem I just had, that's an investable opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really key. Find where the problems are and give a solution. So awesome. Thank you so much for that. So we're going to open up to the room for questions. So please do make sure that you ask a question. Thanks, Dee.
1, 2, 3, it's working. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Bryan, for this amazing piece of information about Gojek and startups in Southeastern Asia. My question is that, do you think that co-working space can become a business incubator, and then it's a good direction to go for the founders to become maybe investors in this maybe unicorns, or you think that it's unlikely?
I think, do you know General Assembly? I believe they were a co-working space at first, and then they started to offer training, and then they've evolved into General Assembly. So I think there's a natural fit.
Where is that? Is it in London?
General Assembly is it's like a training for individuals who need to learn coding and other services. There's a lot of the needs of people in a co-working space it depends on who your target market is. So for example, one of the most successful co-working spaces in San Francisco is called Rocket Space, and it's a pretty boring, their first one's a pretty boring office. However, they have a line of people trying to get in the door because they only take funded startups. And those funded startups are having the same problems. A lot of them have the same problems of growth. So once you get funding, you're having to deal with, you need certain law firms, you need certain HR department services. You're at that point where you're scaling from 4 people testing out a product to hiring 20 people and building out that product. And so people actually want to be around other people that are having the same problem, because they want that collaboration and that learning. And Uber came out of that space and some others, and so they have this alumni. I think a co-working space is in itself a simple real estate business, but if you're able to combine it with something else, then it could be interesting. I think that, but at the same time, I think that incubators and accelerators are often the most successful ones, are the ones that focus on their core offering and then maybe partner with a co-working space so that they don't have to run it themselves, because it's a distraction.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? I have another question then. Since I work here and I'm a little bit in this co-working scene as well, during this co-working and conference, remember we had this debate between people who are into corporate kind of co-working for corporate businesses and co-working for digital nomads, location independent entrepreneurs, destination co-workings and all this kind of stuff. So what do you think where we're going right now? Is it parallels thing that is going on? So there will be co-working is for corporate and it's growing, growing, and growing, or are we going towards this co-working for location-independent entrepreneurs, co-livings, and all this kind of stuff? And what do you think? Where are we going?
I think it depends on who your market is. So some co-working spaces will be for digital nomads and remote workers, and others will be for corporates. I think in a place like Singapore, there will be a lot more of a need for corporates because there's a lot more corporations there. And I think one question you see in the co-working community, because it's so young, is the people that have their own. So a co-working space is successful and it builds one or two, and then it slowly grows. And then there's those that say get financing from investors, partner with developers, and then roll out more co-working spaces focusing on corporate clients. And some of those that are that are doing it on their own see the second set as sellouts. And I think that's just a reflection of the industry at this stage. I think co-working, and I think that's just you see that in every type of business model. Co-working is interesting because it's an expression of the future of work and how workplace is changing. And so there's a lot of different opportunities to get involved in that space, whether it be training or accelerators, incubators, whether it be providing the office space, whether it's creating the data and providing the services. The nature of work is changing, and fewer people are working in the traditional office setting, in the office cubicle. I don't know anyone that works in a cubicle anymore, but nobody wants that type of environment. And so I think more and more people are tending towards an environment. I think the Bali is the extreme end. So all of us over here in Bali are saying, oh, there's all these location independence is the future. It'll always be a small portion of the population, but at least in our next 20 years. But there's trends towards this, and we'll see more beanbags in corporate offices in Singapore.
Thanks, Anna Marie.
Hi, I'm based in the UK in Coventry, near Birmingham, and myself and my brother have taken over a commercial building which has some open plan area and some offices. There are some current tenants in there, and we're looking or toying with the idea of having co-working spaces there and hot desks. We do have a few people in there, but I know there are a few platforms to advertise, but what's your recommendation for advertising these spaces to let people know that you're there? What's a good way of getting to the public, if you like?
I mean, it really depends on your target audience. So I think social media is great, but also a co-working space is a very local business because nobody's going to drive across town to go to your space. So it's hyper-local targeting and all the advertising that you need there. I think what draws people in is the neighborhood that you create. And so if people work in your space, but they're going to want to eat lunch every day, so there's going to need to be food nearby. So if you don't have good restaurant options, you need to attract a good cafe to come. Same with coffee. And then also the more services that are convenient for those coworkers, the better, and the more ability to attract people. It is, I think in the US there's actually a trend. In the US you have a lot of suburbs with a lot of strip malls, which are just open malls that have big parking lots. And a lot of those are really suffering because of e-commerce and Amazon. People aren't going to a lot of these big shop retailers anymore. And some of them are being converted into co-working spaces, actually, and more community-type spaces. And those, from what I understand, some of those are doing quite well, actually, because people don't want to work at home. And although they will order stuff to their home, they would still like to go out somewhere and be around a different community of people to help them work. Social media. Yeah, we find we haven't done much marketing actually for our space, but when we have, it's been social media. Yeah.
In particular, like what social media?
Facebook.
Facebook? Yep, so that's still really relevant. I mean, Facebook obviously is a great way to build a community and to get an awareness around things. So, yeah, that's what I think is a good idea too. So, have you got another question? Oh, okay, over here. Thank you.
I've got two questions. One is on the macro business side. I'm fascinated of what you view as the biggest opportunities for entrepreneurs and also investors, as you've got a very macro view of where the investors are putting their money right now. And then I guess the sub-segment of that is what's the biggest opportunities in the for-profit impact side?
Good questions. Within Southeast Asia, it's very much developing markets. Outside of Singapore, Singapore is a game of its own, but there's kind of I've heard the internet hierarchy of needs, and there was, say, 4 years ago, the big thing that a lot of startups did was the basics of communication. So you had, particularly in Indonesia, you had BlackBerry Messenger, you had Path, which was kind of like a Facebook for a small community, took off really big here. And it's basic social communication. There's low trust, low margin business, but that's what was popular. The next level up was more marketplaces and e-commerce. So that's very basic, transactional. So e-commerce is like Lazada and Traveloka, which is a big transportation platform. And then marketplaces like Gojek and Grab. And those have taken off over the past couple years. More recently, the next level up, where there's better margin and also more trust is required as people get into it, is fintech, and that's where, say, GoPay comes in. I came across one company recently in Jakarta that's very popular, and they're basically buy now, pay later, and it's big data, and they provide short-term loans for 30 days for individuals who want to buy something that they can't afford because they don't have their paycheck. So it'll check out your Facebook profile, it'll do a big data analysis and extend you a short-term loan to cover your product. So that's an example of fintech. And then the very top of the pyramid, so that's real where the opportunity is right now, is some fintech plays. And then the real top is really kind of a tertiary needs, which are very high in terms of trust, and also have better margins. And that you would say is like edu-tech, I guess is what they say, or health tech. And these, for example, is one company that's really taking off in Indonesia right now is called HelloDoc. And HelloDoc is a app-based system that brings together patients, doctors, pharmacies, and insurance providers. And they, basically there's a dearth of doctors in a lot of towns in Indonesia. And what they will do is you can go on your app and you can find a doctor, and then you can FaceTime with your doctor, and you can provide your problem. And then the doctor will prescribe some medicine, right? And then that app will link to the closest pharmacy, which will then fulfill that order. And it will link to your insurance provider as well to help cover that experience. So you actually don't even have to go see your doctor. Do you know who's a big investor in HelloDoc? Gojek. Gojek links up with the pharmacy and delivers it to your door. And you can get your drugs delivered in a matter of hours. So that is where a lot of the opportunities that people are pursuing. And within, say, Southeast Asia, in emerging market context. Singapore is a little different. It's a developed country. They've been very big these past couple years. The big tech opportunities have been in SaaS, software as a service, as well as more B2B type opportunities. Now Singapore is really pushing deep tech, is what they call it, and that's new materials, medical data, robotics. But these are opportunities that require a lot of capital, and you need to really be in these education centers that Singapore's put up. So that's a little different. To your other point, Impact, it's a great question. I have kind of a view that there should be a blurring of lines. If you're doing, say, triple impact or social or environmental impact investing, and you want to do it sustainably, you need to have a good business model that's profitable. And profit has a very close connection often with success in a sustainable business model. If it's not sustainable, then it's probably needs to be a public good and maybe something that governments can tax and regulate. A lot of opportunities. So I would say, for example, a lot of things like here, Alphamart here in Indonesia, providing more products for individuals to purchase that are cheaper priced, that are not expired, is impactful to the consumer. Similarly, Gojek is probably one of the most phenomenal impact stories in Indonesia. Previously, in Jakarta, if you were going to go out on the street corners, these motorcycle drivers would hang out on street corners, and they were called ojeks. No go, but just ojek. And the ojek is a driver, and these ojeks hammer a sign to the board, to a tree that says ojek. And then you go out on the street, and people are like, oh, ojek, ojek, because they want to, kind of like at the airport here, when you get off the plane, all the drivers come up to you. So it's very similar in Jakarta. Now these drivers are very marginal, in the marginal economy, the gray area. They don't have any social security, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have smartphones. And what Gojek did is they actually, when a driver comes on board, they get a bank account and they get a smartphone and they get a tax ID number and they become part of the formal economy. Now they're banked, now they're actually connected to the internet. And they're also taught certain skills, like workplace skills, like you need to shower and provide these certain customer services to your customers. Now, the training, now that's extremely impactful for these 200,000 drivers, right? So I think that, it's a very interesting, nobody ever talks about that for, say, a big business, but I think that's very impactful.
Does that answer your questions? Awesome. This will be our last question and we'll wrap it up. Thanks, Ali.
Hi. My name is Ali. I'm from Indonesia. So actually I have a kind of two light question. First thing is, I know that you've been analyzing all the economy, all the movement and everything. But for us, Indonesian, actually there are a lot of Indonesian companies. Well, basically they're saying that the turnover is lowering. I mean, it's not like a few years ago. It's like not so good anymore. Basically, a lot of companies are surviving now. It's not growing. Some are growing, but most of them are surviving. I want to know what is your opinion about the economy that nowadays. And second one about the Gojek. Yeah, you've been in Gojek and everything. So about the startup strategy, like Gojek company, for us, we see the Gojek is like burning money. It's like they're spending lots of money just acquiring the data. But we had that discussion with a friend and so on, and like we're thinking, Gojek is how will Gojek survive? They're like spending this money, they're not getting any money. And then until when? When will they stop and getting the money then? That is like our question about Gojek.
Two great questions. The first one is, that's what I've heard as well. In traditional businesses in Indonesia, the economy has slowed. And some people don't trust some of the government GDP statistics that are out right now. And so it is going through a cycle of lower economic growth, if not leaning towards a contraction in the economy. In the startup universe, though, the funding there is different. A lot of the funding that goes into startups in Southeast Asia and Indonesia are coming from sovereign wealth funds and large organizations large tech investors. So you've got everywhere from Google, Alibaba, Tencent, Microsoft, Amazon have all bought up companies in this space, and they have lots of firepower. And so VC as a percentage of Indonesia's GDP is 0.09% of its GDP is investments in the venture capital space. So it's virtually, it's a fraction. And so so things can be happening very hot in startup world, which is totally unrelated to the greater economy within Indonesia. So that's indeed true. With Gojek, that is a strategy that you see. I don't know how many of you know Rocket Internet, but Rocket Internet is very famous for pumping huge amounts of money into e-commerce plays all over the world. And a lot of new innovative, disruptive companies like Uber, Grab, and Gojek in that marketplace world, or say in the e-commerce world like Lazada and Alibaba and Amazon, a lot of these investors who have huge, deep wallets that say are deploying $1 billion because they have $100 billion to deploy, they see that it is a fight to the end. They say there's going to be one dominant player, and they subsidize it. So Gojek is extraordinarily innovative, and they have been able to do something better than previously, but they have competitors with Grab, which is the Malaysian group, and then with Uber. And so all three of them are fighting it out. And they're all subsidizing it heavily. And at one point, somebody's going to, either Gojek or Grab will buy out Uber, similar to how Uber was bought out in China. So Uber was competing very fiercely in China, and then they finally gave up and sold to their competitor. And so it became, and that's what you similarly see in e-commerce. And what is interesting here, what I kind of find funny here, is that these huge institutions, these in the U.S. that have billions of dollars, who are the kings of capitalism, are in effect subsidizing. It's a major wealth transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars going to Indonesia, and everybody who rides a Gojek gets subsidized by about 25 cents from an American investor. And so it's a huge wealth transfer, actually, which I think is kind of cool. But yeah, they're fighting it out as a war. I think they could, if they weren't fighting, they could raise the prices a little bit and be profitable. But at this stage, they're kind of ruthless. There's actually, I've even heard some stories about how one of the competitors here in Bali even has a team of people in a room that are calling the competitor and then canceling rides. And because it's a dirty business. It's millions of dollars at stake. So.
Okay, answer it. Thanks, Sally. All right. Well, thanks so much. It's amazing how it's like you hear the term "the world's our oyster," but Southeast Asia is got its own little oyster that people can harness. That I think people look beyond, and you're showing that. And thank you so much for sharing and all your knowledge and being able to support us while you're here as well. Thank you and all the best. Hopefully everything goes in the direction, well, with Outpost in Cambodia in particular, and what else you choose to do.
Sure, thank
Thanks,
you.
Bryan.
Thanks, Terry.
Cool. Round of applause for Bryan.